Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, all. In this season of Venezuelan aggression, I rise as a citizen of Guyana, ever more conscious of the role of the National Assembly in Guyana's body politics and that of every stakeholder vested in Guyana's interests. I rise conscious of how much the Guyanese people are counting on us, their elected representatives, to protect them and this beloved land from invaders. It is the duty of all of our political leaders to speak with one accord, to reassure all Guyanese, irrespective of race or political association, that they are valued, and it is our honor and privilege to protect, serve, and further the real interests of all. We are living in very serious and opportune times. How we navigate both realities will assert the Guyanese aspiration of one people, one nation, one destiny, or fall into the wayside, the consequence of self-serving leadership. In other words, would history record us in this moment of time swimming together or separately, uncaring whether we sink each other because we have not yet learned to appreciate that our lives and destiny are intertwined? While the naysayers may say otherwise, I paraphrase the sage advice of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, that we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will together perish as fools. We meet today to address the motion of Venezuela's continuous saber-rattling, the presumptuous lawlessness to think that we're going to sit silent and to allow them anywhere near our land and waters that are ours by right, as determined by the 1899 Arbitral Award and the International Law of the Sea. Mr. Speaker, consequent upon the Treaty of Washington in 1897 and the Arbitral Award of October 3, 1899, the boundary between what was then British Guyana and Venezuela was settled, and a boundary commission appointed comprising two British commissioners, Messrs. Perkins and Anderson, representing the British government, and two Venezuelan commissioners, Senores Abraham Terrado and Elias Toro, representing the Venezuelan government. The task of the commission was to demarcate on the ground the line of the boundary established by the Arbitral Award and to state it with clarity on an agreed map. The resultant borderline or boundary line was surveyed by the Commission between November 1900 and June 1904 and was settled on a map, an extract from which had been circulated to the honorable members and signed by the commissioners at Georgetown, British Guyana, on the 7th of January 1905. On the 9th of January 1905, a report was submitted by Mr. Perkins, the senior British boundary commissioner, to his principals, and published in the official records of British Guyana for that year. It should be noted that two identical maps were drawn and jointly signed, one for the government of His Britannic Majesty and the other for the Venezuelans, containing all the enumerated details relating to the demarcation with a clear specification of the boundary line according to the Arbitral Award of Paris. On the 10th of January 1905, the British and Venezuelan commissioners signed a formal agreement at Georgetown, referring to the map previously signed by them and endorsing its accuracy and authenticity. Guyanese know on December 3rd that the Venezuelans will go to the polls to vote on 5 questions, which are paraphrased from our point of view. 1, do the Venezuelans agree to reject by all means the boundary line drawn by the 1899 Paris Arbitration Award, which gave Guyana Essequibo? Do the Venezuelans support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument to reach a practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana regarding the controversy over the territory of Essequibo. Thirdly, do the Venezuelans agree with the misguided historical position of not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial controversy over Essequibo? And fourthly, do the Venezuelans agree to oppose Guyana's claim to dispose of our sea consistent with international law? And fifthly, do the Venezuelans agree with the creation of Guyana Essequibo State and the development of an accelerated plan for comprehensive care for the current and future population of our territory, which includes, among other things and others, the granting of citizenship and the identity card of Venezuela in accordance with the expired Geneva Agreement and violation of international law to covet the land which does not belong to them? Mr. Speaker, these questions represents Venezuela's latest unilateral act, the latest unilateral act in a long history of Venezuela's violation and disregard of treaties. The second question of the referendum seeks to state that the Geneva Agreement of 1966 is the only binding and valid agreement for the resolution for this controversy. We state that the Treaty of Washington and the arbitral award is the full, perfect, and final settlement of the controversy surrounding Essequibo. Let us remember that Venezuela has repeatedly breached the Geneva Agreement and rebuffed efforts by Guyana to engage in bilateral talks with Guyana. Venezuela, in respect of the mixed commission established on the Geneva Agreement, has occupied half of the island of Ancoko in the middle of the Cayuni River in breach of this agreement. They've organized within the territory of Guyana clandestine meetings with indigenous chiefs, citizens of Guyana, in an unsuccessful attempt to delude them into supporting resolutions backing Venezuela's claim. And we have mentioned today, they have published in the London Times a paid advertisement saying that she would not recognize any development concessions in the Essequibo region. And they have sought to annex by presidential decree a 9-mile belt running along the coast of Essequibo of Guyana and extending within 3 miles of it. Our governments, particularly for which our party formed, on the 28th of June 1968 and the 18th of July 1968, rejected and rebuffed the Venezuelan efforts to take control of our lands by submitting to them notes of protest. Mr. Speaker, in these circumstances, Guyana cannot engage in any further bilateral and similar talks. Guyana should, must, and shall remain committed to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice for the resolution of the controversy. The people of Guyana deserve no less. The sun of Guyana sets in the Essequibo. There must be no further prolonged attempts by Venezuela to fabricate an eclipse of the sun of Guyana. Venezuela's increasing aggression is not only misplaced, but devoid of legitimacy. Even as we acknowledge these, we cannot ignore, in a world where might could supersede right, small nations such as ours must navigate these murky waters sensibly. Young Guyana, going back to 1965, has been unwavering in its commitment to abide by the 1899 arbitral award that settled the territorial dispute between then British Guyana and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela under the colonial leadership of Britain. Guyanese recall the presence of Premier Forbes Burnham during the 9th and 10th December 1965 at a high-level meeting with the Venezuelan Foreign Minister and the British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, addressing the 7th November 1965 communique signed by representatives of Venezuela and Britain, along with a representative from British Guyana, to, quote, find satisfactory solutions for a practical settlement of the controversy which had arisen as a result of the Venezuela contention that the 1899 award is null and void, end of quote. On the eve of independence, the Forbes-Burnham government pursued a path to resolve this issue through the Geneva Agreement, which the Desmond Hoyt government continued, and on expiration in 1990, pursued the good officer process, which lasted until 2017. In 2018, the David Granger Moses Nagamutu government approached the International Court of Justice, committed to the principle of peaceful resolution. This serves to remind us all, particularly the young Guyanese, who may be unaware or were led to believe differently, that any government the People's National Congress has been part of has consistently navigated this situation with due diligence and sense. In or out of government, the PNC remains committed to protecting and defending Guyana's sovereignty through peaceful and judicious means, legal and diplomatic. 55 years ago, the 12th of July 1960 to be exact, the then leader of the People's National Congress and Prime Minister Forbes-Burnham stood in this very National Assembly and said, and I quote, I cannot tell you with any certainty where this will lead, this ill-advised course of action on which the government of Venezuela has embarked. We must be prepared, however, for further and even more aggressive demonstrations of international lawlessness from the government of Venezuela. We need all our courage and our strength to withstand these efforts to break the will and despoil our land. Venezuela has made her intention clear to seek relentlessly to impose the yoke of colonialism on a young and small nation that has only recently succeeded in freeing itself from the tutelage of another imperial power. He continued, we have no quarrel with the Venezuelan people, but we shall not lack courage or resolve in resisting aggressive demands of a Venezuelan government that is prepared to defile the traditions of Bolivar and to flout the precepts of hemispheric and world order and security. In our stand for survival, we shall call upon the conscience of all peace-loving people to speak out in our cause, and we shall need all our unity as a people so that your voice may be heard in all the corners of the world and in the 11 councils of the world's institutions of peace. End of quote. When Mr. Burnham uttered those profound words that echo today in the halls of this building, he was addressing Guyana's statement on the Venezuelans' decree that purported to plan to annex part of the territorial waters and the contiguous zone of Guyana as part of Venezuela, lying along the coast of Guyana between the mouth of the Essequibo River and the Winey Point. We're here more than a century later, facing a threat of no lesser magnitude, and we cannot pretend that this issue is not a clear and present danger to every citizen of this beloved home and abroad. We are here a century later, more than a century later, after the arbitral award. Mr. Dave Martins captured in a song who we are as a people. I quote, we are a peaceful people. Struggle as we struggle. We don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. Again today, we fire this verbal warning shot to Venezuela. As a citizen, a parliamentarian, and a proud member of the PNC, I join with my colleagues in the AP and UAFC and every Guyanese to reaffirm the position taken by the PNC historically, and in these times, all Guyana, in its present configuration, belongs to all of us. We accept the 1899 arbitral award as the final settlement of the dispute between Great Britain and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on the matter of the border. At the same time, all Guyanese are relieved to hear similar affirmation from the People's Progressive Party, and we repudiate of any idea and any possibility of giving up a blade of grass, the consideration of an offer to Venezuela of a channel to the sea, or anything for that matter that could be construed as unpatriotic and threatening to our territorial integrity. I remind this House that the PPP leader and leader of opposition, Dr. Jagan, in his contribution on the 1968 resolution passed in this National Assembly on the 12th of July 1968 said, and I quote, "In the resolution, we would like to state that we agree that the Venezuelan decree should be considered a nullity, that the decree is a threat of aggression, and that the implementation of the decree should be considered an act of aggression. We are called upon by the government to approve of the government taking all necessary steps to secure the territorial integrity of Guyana. As I've said before, our position on this question is clear, quite clear. We made a point years ago. We put it in a nutshell when we said, not an inch of territory." I look over the seat of the person who now leads Dr. Jagan's party, and sometimes I wonder whether Dr. Jagan will know his party, support the view of the present leader who stunned the nation on the 23rd of October 2015, when he announced at a press conference that his party and government were considering to offer Venezuela a channel to the sea. How much more disturbing could such be a possibility in the face of the 1968 resolution passed by this House, rejecting and rebuffing a resolution of the government of Venezuela that required the armed forces of Venezuela to impose dominion of Venezuela over the belt of sea? How could that happen in the face of a resolution of this House that resolved to declare that the decree to be a nullity and approve of it being so treated by the government of Guyana insofar as it purports to relate to any part of the sea, including the territorial sea and the contiguous zone adjacent to any part of the coast of Guyana and to any part of the continental shelf forming part of the territory of Guyana. When the House passed a resolution to condemn the said decree as constituting an act of aggression against Guyana and as similarly likely to endanger the international peace and security, that denounced that act as an act of aggression against Guyana, done contrary to the Charter of the United Nations, and an attempt by the government of Venezuela to implement the said decree over part of the sea, including the territorial sea and the contiguous zone adjacent to any part of the coast of Guyana. How could it have occurred when the House passed a motion to approve of the government of Guyana taking all necessary steps to secure the territorial integrity of Guyana, including its rights under international law and over the sea adjacent to our coast? Permit me, Mr. Speaker, to remind this House and all Guyana that Dr. Jagan in that debate said that we must not only deny Venezuelans radio time, but we must also restrict them in other places. And I quote his declaration, "Let them go home," he said. "Let them go home." It is amazing, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Shearer will come here this afternoon. The honorable member will come here this afternoon and to present an image that the People's Progressive Party has been a party that has historically been accommodating of migrants. Mr. Speaker, the concerns of the Guyanese people are legitimate. A few days ago, I visited the Haslington area, and the only issue on the minds of the Guyanese people, because of the proximity of this debate, was the situation of Venezuela. And there were concerns about the entry and the unregulated entry, the unplanned permission on migration, and the almost open facilitation of a number of persons from Venezuela coming into this country. Mr. Speaker, there could be no denial that the infrastructure of Guyana can't support that sort of migration. Whilst the Honorable Teixeira speaks of a very progressive position, obviously, comparing what Dr. Jagan said to now, the Honorable Member did not capture the reality of what is happening in Guyana. One of the very first acts of the current PPP government was to impose a visa restriction against Haitians. Persons who are entitled to the free movement of travel within CARICOM. Mr. Speaker, though we join this government, which is our right to do so, and is our obligation to do so, to stand and defend our country against Venezuela, I wish to remind this Honorable House, Mr. Speaker, that in the course of my budget presentations in 2020 and 2021, I said the same thing using exactly the same phrase. And this is what I said. Completely overlooked again in the budget speech is the need for a comprehensive citizenship, immigration, and border policy. I said it, Mr. Speaker. Today, even in the stage that we are in the face of this crisis, this government has failed to bring before us legislation to govern immigration and access in this country. I reject as acceptable, Mr. Speaker, for the Honorable Member Teixeira to give us this sort of laissez-faire approach that anybody could simply cross into our country and somehow we have to accept and bear it. She acknowledged, Mr. Speaker, she acknowledged that Guyana is not a signatory to any convention on migration. Trinidad is not and Tobago is not a signatory to any convention, and they are sending back home the Venezuelans. I believe that this matter needs to be addressed. The brushing of it onto the above and off the table, onto the carpet, vacuum it out, is not sufficient. It does not address the concerns of the Guyanese people on a very important issue. Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly must therefore be unanimous in conviction and purpose on the Venezuela-Guyana border controversy. All and any doubts must be removed that successive governments and the people of Guyana, including the PPP, are not engaged in any nefarious or questionable activities that compromise Guyana's interests. Guyana deserves a peaceful and lawful resolution of this controversy, as led by the Boredom government, to where the matter is presently before the ICJ, as placed by the Granger-Nagamutu government. The people of Guyana must hold their elected leaders accountable to this, failing for which will be complicit with any action taken by this government or any other government that does not serve the interests of the nation and its citizens. The last thing, Mr. Speaker, we who are alive today would want is a repeat of the Malay Provost situation. The lawyer who represented Venezuela in the arbitral tribunal and reportedly requested after his death the release of a 1944 memorandum attacking the 1899 arbitral award on an allegation that the award was a political deal between Britain and Russia. Whilst Malay Provost contention could not be further from the truth, given the 1897 treaty that formed the basis for the award, both Venezuela and Britain agreed, and I quote, to consider the result of the tribunal as a full, perfect, and final settlement of all the questions referred to the arbitrators, end of quote. Nothing from the grave must haunt us. Malay Provost's contention lacks evidence, but is being used by Venezuelans to stir up trouble, which we must be guarded against. Hence, It is important to condemn and relinquish any notion of discussing a deal with Venezuela, because, as we sing, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Forbes Burnham said in 1968 in his presentation in this House, "We are convinced that justice is on our side, and our case can stand thorough scrutiny from any quarter." Having addressed our attention to the issue of reaffirming our commitment to the peaceful and legal resolution to the border controversy and the condemnation of Venezuela's aggression, I turn my attention to the internal management of the state. Guyanese are reminded that the strength of our external defense lies in the cohesion within the state. The disquiet and the rumblings of Guyanese in this oil-rich and the world's fastest growing economy are increasing. Guyanese are growing intolerant with the pervasive social, economic, and political injustices, particularly when they are entitled to fair treatment. Of this government must be reminded that the turning of a blind eye, pretending that there is no societal dysfunction, could lead to grave consequences. We are of one people, one nation, one destiny. And every Guyanese must feel that he or she has a stake in this beloved country and will be treated with dignity and respect. This is where sometimes the government and our party don't seem to share the same beliefs. We believe in the national motto, not a misguided, visionless, poorly executed one Guyana policy, which is not only myopic, but anti-national, unpatriotic. It feeds internal divisions and external forces to exploit in the furtherance of their national interests. It is important for this House to record and for all Guyanese to know that whilst we stand in solidarity with the government and all Guyana in this motion, we will take a momentarily brief pause on our continuous argumentation on this side of the House in relation to the discriminatory management of the state, the continued abuse of public servants and teachers, and unionized workers' rights to collective bargaining. For a moment, we will take a break from our argumentation in relation to the demolition of the guardrails of democracy and the government's apparent determination to create a one-party state. For a moment, we will stand back from President Ali's violation of the Constitution and the contempt of court for not ruling or not participating in...
Honorable member, you will have to withdraw that reference to President Ali.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw it. We will not stand for the violation of the Constitution and the contempt of the court on the substantive appointment of the Chancellor and Chief Justice. The court ruled on the 26th of April 2023 that any protracted or further delay in complying with Article 127(1) of the Constitution is inimical to the independence of the judiciary as set out in Article 122 of the Constitution. For a moment, we will take a break, Mr. Speaker, from complaining and standing up against the demolition of homes. We will take a break today because we stand together for all Guyana in relation to the failure to provide equitable allocation of resources across the country. For a moment, we are concerned and remain concerned about the issue of poverty and the failure of the government to reduce it in a systematic manner. The government's continuous collapse of the education sector, where more than half of the children in the world's fastest growing economy are not literate. Mr. Speaker, we take a break today and join the government in support of this motion, despite the failure to provide proper health services across the country and the inability to provide a basic medication to those in need. Mr. Speaker, we take a break today just for a moment, just for a pause, continue to address the issue of the lack of accountability in the management of the oil sector and its proceeds and the allocation of contracts to the tune of billions of dollars to PPP's friends families, and favorites. Mr. Speaker, we stand for inclusionary democracy as outlined in Article 13 of the Constitution, and we demand the inclusion of all stakeholders, organizations, and individuals in the matter of the Venezuela-Guyana border controversy and every aspect of the management and decision-making process of the state that impact the well-being of the citizens and their representative bodies. To stand allegiance, we on this side of the House pledge to cherish and defend all 83,000 square miles and the 53,347.7 square miles of our exclusive economic zone from foes, external, and any who dare to think they can attack us from within. This land and waters are ours. From the Rupununi to the Quarantine, from the green hard forest to the Atlantic waters, this land was made for you and me. Mr. Speaker, we stand united, and all Guyanese are united, on the fact that Essequibo is the territory of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we stand united, and all Guyanese are united on the fact that the arbitral award of 1899 is the full, perfect, and final settlement of this controversy. Mr. Speaker, we stand united, and all Guyanese are united on the fact that the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice is the only legitimate forum for the clarification of this controversy. Mr. Speaker, I say Guyanese are united. For, as Forbes Burnham said on the 17th of July 1968 in his presentation to this House, when this House agrees unanimously, it is the voice of the majority, the overwhelming majority. Mr. Speaker, the PPP therefore has a duty to partner with our side of the House, our party, and civil society as a whole, and sincerely fight for this land, its institutions and symbols of state, the welfare of each citizen, and everything under Guyana's skies. Political leaders must show the world that in this moment, in this time, when issues require putting the Guyanese people first and putting the Guyanese nation first over self, we stood up and we delivered. Mr. Speaker, I stand on and affirm the immortal words of Forbes Burnham, who said in this House, as I previously referred to in that speech, and I quote, "We are agreed that Venezuela, notwithstanding whatever friendships there may be at the social and personal levels, is an imperialist aggressor. We are agreed on that. Our collaboration on this question is indeed an anti-imperialist exercise. In the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, even if we have no friends with weapons, or prepared to supply us with weapons, or assist us with weapons, we Guyanese people have faith in ourselves. And come to Venezuelans, to every 1,000 blows, we shall be prepared to deal one dead blow. And even if we have to die, we shall not die like hawks, but like men." I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.